The surface of Lake Ransom, Colorado looks calm most of the year until you learn how deep it runs. Beneath the emerald water lie spruce logs, rusted fishing lures, and for 15 years, a missing honeymoon. On June 14, 2008, Mark and Julia Peterson, both 26, left Denver in a silver Honda Civic with a "just married" sticker fading on the rear window. Their plan was a 3-day trip through the Rockies before returning to teach summer classes at the same high school where they'd met. Mark had borrowed camping gear from a colleague. Julia carried a disposable camera and a leather-bound wedding journal. They stopped at a gas station near Gunnison, bought trail mix and 2 cans of soda, and told the cashier they were heading toward Lake Ransom for one last photo before real life starts. That receipt, time-stamped 4:17 p.m., would be the last sign anyone had of them. When they didn't return Monday, relatives called local authorities. A search began that same night. Rangers combed the lakeside roads, but there were no tire tracks, no debris, no evidence of a crash. Helicopters scanned the shoreline using thermal cameras. Nothing. The only clue came a week later, when a fisherman found a license plate frame tangled in weeds near the boat launch. It read, "Happily Ever After." Divers spent 6 days searching the cold, silt-filled lake, but visibility dropped to inches. They surfaced empty-handed. The case was suspended in late July 2008, labeled missing persons, unresolved. For years, the story faded into local legend. Campers told each other that headlights could sometimes be seen under the water at night. Lake Ransom became the place where people whispered instead of shouted. Julia's sister, Megan Foster, never accepted the silence. Every anniversary she drove to the overlook, left flowers, and pressed a hand to the railing as if listening. "They're under there," she'd tell reporters who still cared. "The lake just isn't ready to give them back." 15 summers passed. On August 3, 2023, fisherman Tom Alvarez, 49, launched his small aluminum boat before dawn. He'd fished Ransom for decades, but avoided the northern inlet. Too many submerged trees, too easy to snag lines. That morning, he noticed ripples where the surface should have been still. Curious, he cast his sonar scanner over the area. The screen showed an unmistakable shape. A roofline, 4 doors, wheels upright. He reset the scan. The outline appeared again, clearer this time. An entire car resting on its side roughly 30 feet below. He marked the coordinates, pulled anchor, and called the sheriff. "I think I found a story," he said. By noon, a dive team and tow rig stood at the water's edge. Locals gathered behind the tape as bubbles surfaced in rhythmic bursts. The first diver to reach bottom radioed up, voice shaking, "Sedan, silver, intact plate. Readout matches the Peterson vehicle." When the car broke the surface hours later, water poured from the shattered windows in sheets of silt and pollen. The "just married" sticker was still visible, half peeled but legible. Someone in the crowd whispered they really were down there. Investigators secured the vehicle under a tent by evening. The engine block was corroded but still bore a service shop tag from Denver Honda dated May 2008. Inside, 2 seats were covered by fine sediment. On the dashboard, remarkably preserved, lay a camera sealed in a Ziploc bag. Detective Elena Vasquez, now in her 40s, had been a rookie on the original case. She opened her notebook and wrote only one line. "The lake remembered." Blank. They drained the water from the car and cataloged its contents. In the glove compartment, officers found Julia's wedding journal. The ink had bled into soft blue clouds, but a few words survived. June 14th, we reached the lake. The road curved right, but Mark said, "Let's get closer for one picture." That line alone told investigators what the map couldn't. The couple had likely mistaken a maintenance ramp for the paved boat access. In low light, with fog rising from the surface, the edge between asphalt and water would have been invisible. The car slipped forward silently, and the lake kept its secret. Forensics estimated they drowned within minutes. Both seatbelts were fastened, suggesting no struggle. The passenger side window had cracked from pressure, but not shattered. A slow descent rather than impact. Julia's disposable camera still held undeveloped film. Lab technicians handled it like treasure, drying the roll in a vacuum chamber. Out of 24 frames, 9 developed clearly. The first few showed their drive through the canyon. Mark's hand on the steering wheel, Julia's reflection in the side mirror, sun through clouds. The 9th and final shot captured lake water reflecting headlights, an accidental photo taken at the moment the car tilted forward. The timestamp on that exposure read 7:42 p.m. News outlets nationwide revived the case as the Newlyweds found at Lake Ransom. Viewers compared the recovered images to wedding photos from 2008. The couple looked frozen in eternal youth, forever smiling, forever driving toward the edge of the unknown. At a press conference, Detective Vasquez said, "This discovery doesn't close their story. It simply lets the water tell its part." Julia's sister arrived the next day, standing beside the tow truck as they loaded the Civic. She placed her hand against the window and whispered, "You finally came home." When she looked down, she noticed something caught in the wheel rim, a small metal object glinting through mud. She reached in and pulled it free. It was Julia's wedding ring, bent but still shining. She held it up to the sunlight. For the first time in 15 years, the lake reflected gold. The day after the recovery, a dense fog rolled over Lake Ransom, as if the water wanted its secret back. Deputies cordoned off the shoreline, and technicians in waterproof suits waded into the shallows to retrieve anything loosened by the tow. Every ripple smelled faintly of iron. The crane that had lifted the car sat idle, chains dripping, while reporters clustered near the tape line, waiting for new details. Detective Elena Vasquez stood with her hands in her pockets, watching the mist. She'd worked hundreds of cases since 2008, but this one still gnawed at her throat. "They were the same age I am now," she told the deputy. "Feels like the mountain just froze them," and waited. At the forensics tent, evidence lay on tarps marked with chalk numbers. The contents of the car were arranged like artifacts: seatbelts, wallet, camera, wedding journal, 2 coffee thermoses, a pair of hiking boots still laced together. On one boot, initials were faintly etched into the heel, MP. Technicians placed the disposable camera in a humidity-controlled chamber. Then came the lake itself, a flat mirror, edges blurred by fog. The final photo was unintentional. Headlights on water, a pale hand gripping the dashboard. The film stopped mid-frame, half of the image drowned in white. Elena printed all 9 photographs, labeling them chronologically. In each, Julia's smile was effortless, the kind that expected years ahead. Elena wrote in her report, "They died believing they were safe." The lab also thawed Julia's wedding journal. Pages fused together like petals, but ink under ultraviolet light revealed faint sentences. One stood out. "He says the lake looks like a mirror. I told him not to get too close. He laughed and said mirrors don't pull you in unless you want them to." For investigators, that note answered everything and nothing at once. The sheriff's department scheduled a press briefing for Monday. Journalists gathered outside the courthouse as boxes marked Peterson case 2008 to 2023 were carried in. Inside, Elena addressed the crowd. "Evidence shows no sign of foul play. Weather conditions and topography confirm an accidental submersion near the maintenance ramp. The Petersons were found side by side, seatbelts fastened. Case status concluded." Her voice faltered slightly at that last word. The microphones picked it up anyway. After the press conference, Julia's sister Megan met Elena at the impound lot where the Civic was stored. The car looked smaller than she'd imagined, its paint dulled to matte gray. "I used to hate this car," she said, tracing a finger across the door. "It smelled like gasoline and cheap coffee. Now I'd give anything to hear it pull into the driveway. Elena nodded. You'll be able to take the personal items once the paperwork clears. Megan glanced toward the lake. Do you think they knew what was happening? Elena hesitated. I think they saw it too late, but they saw it together. Later that week, the forensic team drained the vehicle completely. Under the passenger seat, they found a sealed plastic case. Inside were wedding negatives, perfectly preserved, and a folded note written in Mark's handwriting. If this trip takes us, tell them we made it to the lake. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a revered. A line from a teacher who had once told his students that every photograph is just proof of having been somewhere. The department released digital copies of the recovered photos to the family. Megan posted one to a memorial page, the two of them at the overlook, Julia's arm around Mark, the world still dry and golden. The caption read, "They made it to the lake." By September, the lake thawed again, and tourism returned. Fishermen cast lines into the same inlet, the same water that had kept the Civic hidden all those years. Most said it felt wrong to fish there now, but curiosity always wins. Locals began leaving small offerings near the boat launch: white flowers, film canisters, scraps of ribbon. Someone carved 15 years later into the railing. Elena returned once more before the season closed. She parked near the overlook where Julia had taken her last photos. The wind moved the grass in slow waves. Down below, the lake mirrored the sky perfectly, no hint of what it had held. She took out her phone and zoomed in. Near the far bend, something shimmered just beneath the surface. A faint metallic flash, circular. She climbed down to the bank and knelt. The water was cold, but clear. Half buried in the silt lay a camera lens ring, detached from the disposable camera during the recovery. She lifted it gently and turned it toward the sun. The glass caught light in a perfect circle, projecting a miniature rainbow onto her wrist. For a long time, she watched the reflection. "You got your picture," she whispered. 2 months later, the local museum hosted an exhibit titled "The Lake That Remembered." It displayed the preserved Civic's license plate, the wedding ring, and the recovered photographs. Visitors lingered before the final frame, the headlights on water, as if it held an answer. Beneath it, the curator had placed Julia's note about mirrors. People left the gallery quieter than they'd entered. In December, the town installed a small wooden sign at the lake's entrance, Lake Ransom Memorial, in memory of Mark and Julia Peterson, discovered August 3rd, 2023. Mirrors don't pull you in unless you want them to. At dusk, lights reflected off the surface, just as the fog rolled in again. For a fleeting second, two beams shone through, twin flares of light moving side by side before fading under the waterline. Elena stood at the edge, camera in hand, and took one last photo. When she checked the preview screen, her own reflection overlapped with the glow on the lake. It looked like 3 figures standing together. She smiled, then turned off the camera. The mountains echoed with wind, and the water rippled once, as if something below had finally exhaled. Winter blanketed Lake Ransom early that year, sealing the water under a thin crust of ice. The mountains around it looked hollowed out by cold. In Denver, the Peterson families tried to rebuild around what they'd finally been given: proof, but not peace. Julia's sister Megan worked with a local nonprofit that documented unsolved disappearances across the Rockies. She'd never imagined her project would include her own family's name. At her dining table, she sorted through envelopes of condolence letters, newspaper clippings, and the developed prints the sheriff had returned. Every time she reached the last photograph, headlights reflecting on dark water, her hands shook slightly. She began assembling an exhibit proposal, The Lost Roads of Colorado. It would showcase cases closed by natural causes, not crime, because nature keeps its own secrets, she wrote in the mission statement. Elena Vasquez agreed to help, donating copies of the investigation files and photos she'd taken during recovery. One evening in February, Megan drove back to the lake to take updated pictures for the exhibit. The highway was empty, snow glowing in her headlights. She parked near the memorial sign, its lettering half covered by frost, and sat in silence for a long while. Through the windshield, she saw the lake shimmering faintly beneath ice, a single patch of unfrozen water near the center. It reflected the moon like a coin tossed back to the surface. She stepped out, breath turning to mist, camera ready. The air smelled metallic, like rain before it falls. She took 3 shots: the frozen inlet, the memorial plaque, and the open water. When she checked her screen, the 3rd image glowed oddly, 2 pale circles of light near the center, overlapping like halos. Her first thought was lens flare. Then she realized she hadn't used flash. She lowered the camera, heart pounding. The lake lay still. The circles were gone. "Good night," she whispered, voice trembling, and drove away. By spring, her exhibit opened in a small Denver museum. Visitors lined up to see the miracle film that had survived 15 years underwater. The final panel displayed Julia's handwritten line about mirrors, beside a photo of the Civic being lifted from the lake. A speaker looped gentle ambient sounds of water and wind. An elderly couple stopped in front of it one day, listening quietly. The woman said, "They got their picture, didn't they?" The man nodded. They just had to wait for the right light. Megan overheard them and smiled. That sentence would become the closing caption for the museum's permanent version. They waited for the right light. Meanwhile, Lake Ransom changed again. In June, divers from the Department of Wildlife conducted a sonar survey. The technician noticed something unexpected. The depression left by the car had filled with sediment and created a new reef-like shelf. Fish had begun nesting around it, and clear water pooled above. The sonar reading formed a near-perfect outline of a heart when viewed from above. When the data reached Elena, she drove up to see it herself. Standing on the overlook, she laughed softly. "Nature doesn't waste anything," she said to the ranger beside her. "Even loss becomes architecture." She took a photo for Megan's archive, the new underwater formation glimmering under sunlight. "That's how they stay," she murmured. "Not gone, just reshaped." Later that summer, the State Tourism Board contacted Megan about incorporating the story into a public safety campaign. The slogan would read, "Respect the water, remember the Petersons." She agreed on one condition, that the sign include Julia's quote about mirrors. When installed, the placard stood at every major lake access in Gunnison County. The campaign reduced water accidents by 20% within its first season. Reporters called it the story that saved others. In October, the lake froze over once more. Elena visited on her day off, carrying a single white rose. She walked to the railing, set the flower on the ice, and took out her phone. The photo she captured showed a perfect reflection of the surrounding peaks. She zoomed in. Faint distortions rippled just below the surface, like shadows of 2 figures holding hands. She blinked, and they were gone. She exhaled and said softly, "Rest now." A year after the discovery, Megan published a short book titled The Lake That Remembered. It wasn't a true crime account, but a meditation on memory, how some stories resist decay. She dedicated it to anyone still waiting for light to surface. In its final chapter, she described visiting the museum at night after closing. She wrote, "Sometimes, when I turn off the lights in the exhibit, the glass cases glow faintly. The reflection of the wedding ring catches the projector beam. It looks like the start of another photograph waiting to be taken." Readers sent letters saying it changed how they saw tragedy, not as endings, but as messages left for the living. 15 months after the recovery, local fishermen reported seeing 2 brief flashes under the lake just before dawn. Not headlights, but something gentler, pulsing like slow camera strobes. One man swore he heard a faint melody afterward, something like a wedding song muffled by distance. The story spread, and people started calling the spot the reflection point. It became a quiet pilgrimage site, not for thrill seekers, but for couples who'd lost someone and wanted to stand where love had outlasted time. In the final entry of her books afterward, Megan wrote, "Water has a memory longer than grief. It does not keep secrets, it keeps moments, returning them only when we're ready to understand." When light hits Lake Ransom at the right hour, you can see it, not ghosts, but proof of devotion, moving side by side beneath the surface, still driving, still laughing, still chasing the picture they wanted most. That last line would later appear carved into stone at the overlook, still driving, still laughing, still chasing the light. When the sun sets behind the mountains, the entire lake catches fire in reflection. For a few seconds, the glow looks like headlights cutting across the water before fading into dusk. The wind passes through the pines, carrying a whisper that could be anything, maybe the sound of a shudder, maybe a quiet goodbye. Either way, Lake Ransom listens.